Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. So my name is Martin O'Leary. I'm the studio community lead here at the Pervasive Media Studio. I'm a white man in my 40s with long hair and a beard, wearing a very autumnal red jumper today. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer you the chance to spend some time in our space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So especially big welcome to anyone who's new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put your hand up? Okay, quite a few today. Hello, welcome. This bit is for you. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We are a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, UE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England. So we offer studio space, including desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And most of all, we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So a few notes just before we begin. Please do feel free to move around. There's a kitchen back there. You can grab a glass of water, tea or coffee. I think the sink is blocked right now. It may or may not have been fixed. Check the sign. If not, there's water in the bathrooms. We do have a quiet space just next to this space, so to my left, to your right, through that wall there is a little quiet space. You can pop in there, have a rest. It's soundproof, there's sofas, there's beanbags if you need to take a break at any point. We are not expecting a fire drill. If you hear a fire alarm, it's probably real. We will direct you to the fire exits, but again, they are at the other side of the studio, again, to my left, your right. But the studio team will direct you if we need them. And then there are accessible toilets and baby change in the corridor over there next to the kitchen. Our talk today is coming in remotely. There will be a Q&A at the end, so those of you who are watching online, can you pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Lowerton will be your voice in the room today. If you're in the building, please raise your hand and I'll send around a microphone so that Eryk can hear you. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. All right, our speaker for today is Eryk Salvaggio. Eryk is an artist, writer, researcher, and curator who explores AI from a critically, artistically informed perspective. Recently, he's been thinking a lot about the role of noise in generative AI systems. Today, he's joining us to discuss how he works with the technical and cultural noise of AI to critique assumptions about humanity that have informed the way they operate. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Eryk.
Thanks, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I think I can hear a bit of echo. Nope, I can't. Okay, great. So fantastic. Thanks so much. I had the joy of visiting that exact room a couple months ago. It's great to be connected with all of you again, and to new folks. The stuff I talked about last time is a little bit of that's in here, but it's mostly going to be looking at things from a different angle. So I hope you enjoy the talk, even if you've heard me talk before. And for the new folks, thanks so much for coming. I'm going to share my screen. If you'll just give me 1 second, I'm going to make sure I do it correctly. And so, hopefully, what you see is a screen with a woman on it who is sort of immersed in a kind of digital, watery scene, and it's filling up the screen. Can anyone give me confirmation that it's coming through? Okay. My name, as said, is Eryk Salvaggio. I am a white, bespectacled, bearded man in his early 40s, the hair going a little grayer than it may be in the photograph that's on screen right now. As mentioned, I am an artist and a curator. I've been working with net art as well as digital collage, and more recently, which is about 7 years ago, I started working with artificial intelligence systems. I'm a curator. I've done some collection. I've been working with a lot of other artists for various types of exhibitions and shows, mostly also focused around AI, often from a critical perspective or point of view. I'm a writer. You could find some of my writing at the QR code below. If you want to wait, I'll show it again at the ends, but I'm the writer for the Cybernetic Forests Substack. I'm also a policy researcher, and the reason I'm mentioning all of this stuff is that I hope it gives you a perspective of what I'm bringing to this conversation in terms of the backgrounds and the ways that I'm looking at AI. So policy researcher definitely influences my work as an artist, and my work as an artist definitely influences my work in policy. This is policy around technology. I'm a lecturer in responsible AI. I teach at Eryk Salvaggio, Barcelona, and I will be coming in at the Rochester Institute of Technology here in New York. And I'm an advisor on emerging tech. And to be specific, the advising that I'm doing is the potential harms of emerging technology and how we might mitigate them. So a lot of the work I do is with nonprofits and philanthropic orgs rather than industry. So that's a little bit about me, just to give you a perspective on my perspective. And I also wanted to mention, for those concerned, this talk will make some mention of racial stereotypes as well as colonial archival practices. So I just wanted to mention that at the outset. The QR code will take you to my newsletter if you are interested, but I'll show it again. All right. So enough about me. Let's talk about art and AI. And my hope is that we'll have some time for questions and conversation at the end of this. Losing a little control over here. So when we talk about generative AI, a lot of people have a lot of ideas about what's going on at the heart of it. And what I like to do is what I call a slow reading of AI, generative AI. And particularly, I'm interested in the training process, how information that's online, archival information, becomes a data set of images, and how those images are then transformed into noise, and then how that noise is turned into the seed for a new image. And this is a very simple reduction of that process, but I wanted to walk through it kind of quickly, though not as quickly as it happens when you're training an image, right? This happens in the snap of a finger. When you're training an AI image model, it happens as quicker than we can calculate. But let's walk through this image. This is a man in muddy pants diving into what we presume is a muddy lake. And it's a bit blurry, but you can see the man, his arms are outstretched. He's diving into some very blue water. And this is an image at the far left that comes from an image archive. It comes from a photographic archive of home images that have been shared online and are available in an archive. In this case, it comes from the Internet Archive. And the Internet Archive is a source of training data, whether it agrees to that or not. A lot of industry is just finding images wherever they can. And in the training process, what happens to that image is that information is removed from it step by step. So here, what you're seeing is a kind of gradient of that image with information being taken out of it until about this midpoint. And I'm not sure that you can see my cursor, but by the midpoint, you just see absolute noise, absolute static. All of the information in that image has been essentially obliterated. But if we look between that starting image and this middle point, what you have is some patterns, right? If you look at the end, this stopping point in the first row, you can still see this kind of ghost of an image. There's some outline there. And what I want to kind of highlight is that as you reduce this information out and this background out, there are keywords associated with this image. For example, man in muddy pants diving into water. Now, what you will have here is the outline of a man, right? And this pose of a man, even though some of the details are gone, you've got this outline. And so by the time it's obliterated, the training, the model that has been trained can take this image of noise and walk it in reverse, because each step where information has been removed can be memorized and traced backwards because it is following a particular pattern. So noise is introduced to this image in a particular way that can be reversed. And so what it's learning is how to move noise back to the training data, back to this original image. And along the way, these details are removed, and the things that are sort of like the most obvious elements of the image. So here you see barely this outline of a man, right? And this will become associated with that keyword man. Now, this part, up until the end of this sort of third image in this middle row, is the training process. When we move to this image, what we're actually shifting to conceptually is what happens when you go to an image generation model and you ask it to make an image of a man in muddy pants diving into a lake or diving into a pool of water. And what it will do is generate random noise. And so what will happen is that those patterns that have been memorized in this process, in the sense of this is the sort of first or last thing that's there, this basic outline of a man, will become the first sort of rough structure generated. And it's being generated as an outline from hundreds and thousands of images that are associated with this image or this label of that image called man, right? Or man diving or man jumping. And then as it goes, it refines this data. And there's another part of the process that's looking at every image that gets generated and looking at the prompt you've given it and saying what the percentage likelihood is of that image matches your prompt, that is an image of the thing you've described. So here you might say, what is this? I'm looking for an image of a man in muddy pants diving into a lake. And it might say this is a very low likelihood of that's what's in this image. But it'll sharpen this. The model itself will sharpen it and redefine it based on the patterns it knows. And we'll send this along. And now maybe there's a 10% chance that this is recognized as an image of a man diving into a lake, et cetera, et cetera. And from there, it'll take this image and it will refine it. And it'll sharpen and sharpen and sharpen, removing noise from this image until there's a 100% certainty from that image recognition system that, yes, this passes for a man diving in a lake. Now, maybe we've lost some details, right? The pants are no longer muddy. The pants are just shorts, right? Bathing shorts. And so you have a different image and you have different things that are prioritized in what it says yes to. So this is the training process and generation process for an AI image system. And I say this because what I'm really interested in is this middle section where the noise is the reduction of an image, the reduction of essentially our visual culture as it is presented online into an image of noise. And then also this reversal of that process where our visual culture is used to shape noise in the direction of an image that doesn't exist, that is not a direct reference to anything, but is an indirect reference to many, many things. And so this is the training process that I'm interested in. And I'm looking at what exactly are we doing to these images? How are we complicating this visual history, this visual archive? When we reduce it to noise, what are we losing? What are we stripping out? When we reduce it to noise and reduce it to keywords, we're stripping out a lot of context. We're losing out on a lot of meaning. But then there's something else happening in the reversal of that, where we're taking an image, we're asking for something, and we're generating images that don't reference anything, that don't actually tie to a specific context, but tie to a kind of generalization of context in general, of lakes in general, of men in general, of shorts in general, of jumping in general. So it's proposing a hypothesis of what an image could be that matches the keywords, right? So this is why I refer to these things as hypothetical images. It is not a real image. It's a proposal for an image that might match your prompt. It just also happens to be an image. So enough on that. This is background just to tell you why I'm interested in noise and how my interest in noise came to be. So some of the work that I'm doing is exploring these ideas of the relationship between archival material and noise. So the first piece that I could talk about is a piece called Swim. We're looking at a still image, but it is a 9-minute long video of a, so I'll describe it, and I'll describe it in layers because I think it's important to kind of get at some of how this is working and how I'm engaging with the artifacts of AI image synthesis and generation as a medium in and of themselves, because that's what I'm trying to do. Rather than reference images with AI, I'm trying to reference the system of AI. So here, what I've done is I've generated a background, which is an image where I've requested the machine to make noise. And the thing that happens is you can't actually generate an image of noise. If we go back to this, remember, it's stripping noise away from an image. So if I ask it for an image of noise, it immediately is evaluated by that image recognition system. And it's saying, yeah, yes, that's noise. But it still has about 70 steps to process this image. But if it's already pictured an image of noise at the first step, it's kind of looking for additional patterns anyway to replicate and duplicate and inscribe or take out of this image of noise until it's shaped into something else. But there's nothing in the system that's saying, no, that's not noise, because it starts with an image of noise. So it's always noise. And so what we are looking at when we ask for an image of noise, and we'll look at some of these other ones later, are essentially what the system is trying to do with random noise when it has to do something to that noise, but is not given any further instruction or prompting from the internal system that's saying yes or no. That's an image of a man diving into water. That is an image of flowers. With noise, it can't do that. And so what you get are these abstractions that resemble this kind of stuff in the background. In the foreground is the image of a swimmer. It's a black and white image of a swimmer floating in water. And this is an image from an archive. It comes from the University of Chicago archive. It's a film that's about 90 seconds long. And this is a swimmer named Ninny Shipley. And this is classified by the University of Chicago archives as erotic entertainment. This is a film that was taken of a woman swimming underwater for the purposes of the male gaze. And I'm interested in thinking about that as how AI examines bodies when it is diffusing these bodies into noise, when it is breaking the information apart from these images in order to create a generalization. And so this training material, which I have to be upfront, is by today's standards very tame. I want to be clear; it's not what we would classify as erotic entertainment today. But I'm trying to think about this image as an archival image, and this woman who is swimming in this media environment, right? She's swimming in water, but she's also swimming in this media environment. And over the course of the 9 minutes, I've slowed this down. The swimming is slowed down and the music is slowed down, and it becomes a kind of elegy to the training data, to the image in the archive, to the film in the archive. And over the course of that 9 minutes, what we don't see here is the diffusion process. That is the breaking down of the image into noise. So over the course of 9 minutes, more and more information is stripped out of this image until what we end up with is a wall of noise. And these three elements are kind of reflect these three pieces that I'm so deeply invested in as an artist, which is the glitch, getting these systems to produce artifacts of their process as opposed to references in their training data. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute. Looking at the training data itself, but looking at it through the lens of archives, which is where this material is coming from, and the shift in the relationship to these images when we look at them as archives as opposed to when we look at them as data. It is a shift akin to finding a photo album of a family at a thrift store or a rummage sale and looking at the family and pointing things out like the weird clothes they were wearing in the 70s, right? Or kind of pointing at people, but not necessarily having a connection to those people. So if it's your family photo album, you may have a very different relationship to the people in that album. You may feel a different sense of responsibility to respecting the images, and you may laugh, but it's a different kind of laugh. It's not a pointing at, it's a laughing with, right? So there's a relationship when we have a kind of solidarity or familiarity with the material in an archive, when we respect the context of that material, that we lose when we treat it as data, focus on stripping context away and reducing it to simply what is in the image. What are the points of data in this image? What colors are the pixels? And how do we reproduce something resembling that lineup of pixels in the material we generate? So it's a different set of questions and a different kind of relationship. When I'm talking about noise, sometimes people ask me, what do you mean? And I want to be clear. This is what I mean. Literally, this is an image of noise. Pixel by pixel, it is a randomly generated value of color. This is what happens. This is what happens when an image is reduced to training data. This is the result. And this is what you start with when you begin the generation process. And as we go through, this noise is cleaned up. Clusters of random pixels are sort of thrown together. And then that image verification system says, yes, that's a flower. No, that's not a flower. Yes, that's a man. No, that's not a man, etc. And this is a kind of fraught process as well. One of the experiments that I've been able to do in my research as an archiver and artist was with the Flickr Foundation there in London. And as a research fellow with the Flickr Foundation, I became interested in stereo view images. This is a stereo view image. It comes from the archive. What you see are two pictures of the moon side by side, and surrounding it is a kind of cardboard frame. And the idea of stereo view images is that you could hold them about, I don't know, about like 6 inches. Sorry, I don't know that in centimeters, but basically you hold it very close to your face, and the two images sort of overlap because of the way our eyes tend to work, and it gives this illusion of depth. Now, this type of image was extremely popular in the United States at the turn of the century, the early 1900s, late 1800s. And this was actually the most popular image format at that time. And so there are archives of these images. And if you go into Midjourney and you ask for Midjourney to generate these images, something really interesting happens. You get this side-by-side image, but you also get a very particular image of people and a very particular representation of place. You get what I have sort of concluded are representations of the Philippines. And this happens when you ask for stereo view, not stereo view Philippines, not stereo view 1900, but just the word stereo view. And so what has come to my mind in these images is that this association with the Philippines is so predominant in the training data because of the way that we have archived these images, that it is literally more associated with the training data than the frame, which is universal to the stereo view, that cardboard frame that we saw that structures the stereo view image as two images side by side. And the end result is that you end up representing what came to be one of the most widely circulated subjects of stereo view images, which was the American occupation of the Philippines. So again, here, this is an actual image of a stereo view image from the archive in the Library of Congress here in the US of a girls' school in the Philippines. And what you see here is an image that I think speaks to a very similar kind of image structure. But what you will notice is that it is present when we ask for stereo view, even if the side-by-side elements that we associate as a core aspect, the thing we describe when we describe a stereo view image, is missing. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because the references that we make in AI systems are references to keywords stripped of context. And if the keywords are being associated with something in an archive, the biases of that archive, and what I mean here is literally the bias in the sense of what is in that archive and what is represented in that archive most often becomes associated with that word. It's not necessarily an understanding of what the media format is of stereo view images. It is a understanding of the content of those images. And so what we are losing is significant context, because when you generate these images, there's no explanation offered to someone as to why these are the people being depicted, why this is the place being depicted. It simply is what is being depicted. And I find that fascinating and problematic. So one of the ways that I'm curious to engage with AI systems is by denying a kind of leaning that happens on referentiality in the images. Because when you are referencing things, you are referencing a lot of problematic content. There's a long conversation to be had about that, about the biases in the largest training data set that's out there for these images, which is Leon 5B. That's the name of the data set, and it has been just heavily critiqued with the types of material, the types of images that have been collected, and the types of things that are being referenced when we make images with AI. And so I'm fascinated instead with the glitch. What do you do? How do you get into the system in order to generate something that is not referential to the data set? Now, AI systems are not intelligent. Despite their name, you cannot say, ignore the data set, right? This is not a command that an AI system could remotely understand, because the prompt is not giving an instruction. The prompt is giving a word that it is looking for associations with in the training data, essentially, right? I'm really condensing this process, but the training data creates a model, and we access that model through our language. We're not giving commands, we're giving coordinates to the model. And so when the coordinate is noise, I'm able to get in there and create glitches. And that to me is more interesting than the referentiality of images that we can get out of AI. So this is an actual image, and this I reference because this is an early computer bug. This comes from Harvard computer scientists who were working back when your relays and computers were room-sized, and there was a moth in the wiring. And so relay number 70, panel F, there's a moth, and they tape it to this notebook about the sort of checkup that they're doing with their computer system. And this moth comes to essentially be a glitch in the system. It is reality interfering with the processing of information in the computer world, in this sort of datafied landscape that the computer deals with. There's a moth outside that system, and it's introducing a different type of noise to that system. And I'm fascinated by this. And I'm also fascinated by this strange connection to Stan Brackage's experimental film called Mothlight, where he was really interested in exploring film as a medium in the 1960s. And so what he did was he found dead moths around his lights at his cabin, and he took these dead moths and he taped them or glued them to film strips. And he then projected these film strips through a projector, and what you saw was the light filtered through the moth, right? Now, this is an interesting relationship between the image that's usually in a film strip and the material reality that we live in. And I'm curious about that relationship as it reflects this kind of computer process of this moth getting into the relay, the moth being sort of embedded into the film and replacing the symbolic, but also in a way becoming symbolic. And so there's a kind of noisy conceptual space around there where the borders are very fuzzy. And that's really fascinating to me. And so one of the films that I produced this year is a film called Moth Glitch, which is a direct reference to Mothlight. And I'm using these AI-generated mistakes, these glitches, these noisy artifacts, which you see some of the textures in the background. I'm animating them so that they are forced to kind of shift and blur, and they get all kinds of image artifacts. And then I'm using generated video models to try to generate an image of moths. And I don't have that video here, but they don't fly correctly. It cannot model the flight of a moth correctly. And so you have these uncanny moths flying around this sort of vibrant light generated by AI. And we as the audience are using these moths as a kind of intermediary into a space that isn't real in any real way, but is a reference to this glitchiness of moths in the system and the materiality that Stan Brakhage was trying to get to, and the materiality of the moth in the early computer relay. This is, probably should have come earlier in this talk, but this is what it looks like when you ask a system to generate an image of noise. Now, there's a kind of hypothetical tension here, which is this generating an artifact of noise, or is it generating something in the training data that is tied to a description of noise? In other words, is this the system's attempt to show me what noise looks like based on training data, or am I actually getting noise out of the system? And in order to answer that question has essentially been what's been driving my research into these systems. And I began looking at the training data in order to understand what is in the training data for noise. And I will say that very little of it looks like this. I would actually say none of it looks like this, but I can't say that with certainty because I haven't looked at every image associated with noise because I'm a human being. And those archives, that data set is not meant for human beings to look at. It's too big, and it's hidden behind a lot of proprietary walls by companies that don't allow us to see them. We have to look at sort of the open source training data, but I could say that noise does not look like this in the training material. And so knowing that and knowing how the system works, I'm quite confident that this is a glitch. This is a glitched AI image. This is an artifact of glitching an AI image. And I find these fascinating. And aesthetically, I find them pleasing. I've been coming around to finding them more aesthetically pleasing, but I also find them conceptually interesting as a way of thinking about our relationship with these models and how we can get in the way of what they're trained to do, how we can be problematic users that interfere with the assumptions of designers, and to some extent, the manipulation of designers into thinking about what we're doing as somehow accessing the imagination of a computer. The computer has no such imagination. The computer is not necessarily creative as we might define it. Instead, it is going through a process, and by asking it to create noise, I'm circumventing parts of that process that result in, ironically, an accurate representation of noise, but one that doesn't reference noise in the training data or materials. So here are some other images of noise in the system where we can begin to see a little bit of how this is written. You start to see patterns in the data, in the images, right? You start to see the patterns of how it is trying to find patterns. So textures, certain specific textures tend to reemerge over and over again. And certain kind of structures emerge over and over again in the images. So here's another. And so these are images of noise, still images of noise. And as I mentioned, I've also been interested in videos, how we can animate images of noise, how generated video works. I also work with generated sound and how this might work in generated sound. And because they are all still fundamentally a similar type of model, which is the diffusion model, which is working by reducing the training data to noise in the first place and then generating from noise, it tends to work in similar ways. You end up with unexpected results, unexpected patterns, or an absence of pattern in the outcome. This is asking a different model, ChatGPT, which is a text model, what noise looks like. And I just found it really interesting because there's elements here of noise in the sense I think of sonic noise, right? So this is interpreting noise differently than the diffusion models trained on stable diffusion, which are these. But then it also creates this weird sphere, which I don't really make sense of. And you're also getting this kind of noise in the background, which is different than how we might think of noise in training data in general, but actually does reflect a sort of pixel by pixel assembly of static that I just think is interesting. So what I guess is interesting is that there's a difference between the ways different models handle this request. And so the glitches of different models result in different products and outcomes. So I want to wrap up and make sure we have time for questions, but I just wanted to come to a couple central points. One is which is, am I a collaborator or adversary of the AI? A lot of artists will define themselves as collaborators with the AI, and I don't see that as a problem, but I do see it as shaping a type of relationship. A collaborator, in a sense, demands that we are accommodating a logic and definition of creativity that is embedded into the systems that we're working with. It requires us to work within the confines and affordances of those systems. In other words, if we're collaborating with an AI, we're basically saying, if we say, well, I'll put it this way, if we're collaborating with a person, right, it's a give and take. There's a set of compromises that are evoked. You're giving something and I'm giving something. And if there's something in conflict, we work out what that conflict is and how to resolve that conflict. As a collaborator with an AI system, we are working with an interface, and that interface does not negotiate. And so what we are working with is we are collaborating with the affordances of that interface. We are collaborating with what that interface allows us to do. And the interface is not making any compromise with us. So we are constantly navigating it. So it is, I think, actually challenging for me to see my role with these systems as collaborative. So I don't use the word collaborator. Other artists do, and I think that's totally fine. I want to be careful I'm not casting judgment here. But there's also a different way of looking at it, and I think we need a plurality of perspectives on the ways we work with these tools. And so the perspective that I bring is an adversarial approach, which is I'm thinking critically about the compromises that these systems are asking of me, and I'm trying to find ways to reverse them. Trying to find ways to compromise the system as opposed to being compromised by the system. Now, I am also very aware of the critique that what I am doing is largely defined by what the model allows me to do, right? I am literally shaping my practice around the models. So there is definitely a relationship there, right? But it is an adversarial one. I'm trying to crack through the model and strip away some of the imagination around that model that exists in order to see how it works and expose sections of the models that the companies that make them may not want me to see. And to think about what those models are doing to our data and what that data is doing to culture and society at large. And finally, I say AI has developed around a number of myths. And these myths are believed in by the industry that makes these things. And the industry is populating these myths among policymakers and among the general public, among educators. These myths are pervasive, but they come from industry and they are myths. They are a shared belief about the thing we are looking at that we call artificial intelligence. So AI is developed around a number of these myths, believed by industry about what AI is doing and how it does it. And this is usually shaped around metaphors of the human mind. And I'm interested in stripping information and imagination out of AI, rather than expanding on this idea, this particular imaginary of the AI as a comparison to human intelligence. What I would like to do is make work that lays bare the process of generative AI that eliminates this imagination. So usually artists are working to expand imaginations of technology. I'm actually working to strip imagination out, but a particular type of imagination in order to make rooms for other, more diverse imaginings of what AI is and what AI could be. Different metaphors that help us understand and relate to these systems on what I think are better terms and foundations. Because if we compare ourselves to AI, there is a risk of diminishing the definition of these abilities, such as creativity, such as learning, in order to make them align with the machinic processes that have been built around the model of those practices. It is a form of creativity that can be sort of reduced to a step-by-step process, but humans are capable of branching out into many directions. And I think that's important, right? This process is one model of the mind. And I'm interested in what that contrasts with, what else humans can do, but also which mind the AI is modeling. And what I see is that it is one that is obsessed with patterns. It is one that is obsessed with finding patterns, but also in removing noise from its environment. And when I think about which version of the human mind that most closely resembles, what I see is a frightened mind. I see a mind that hears noise, sees noise as a threat, clings to patterns for comfort, and I see that as someone who is surrounded by the noise of a riot rather than the noise of a party. And I would emphasize that we can look at noise through the lens of a party, of play, of possibility, of exploration, of variety, rather than something that needs to be stripped away and reduced. Because when we strip noise away from our environment, we tend to isolate ourselves. And I say this on a political level, I say this on a conceptual and philosophical level, and I also say this on a technological level. The things we remove from our communications, the things that algorithms strip away because they're overwhelming us, is handing a choice about our engagement with the world, with diversity and with possibility to a machine that is trained to reduce that to as narrow a path as possible. And I think that is a model of a frightened mind. And humans can be something else. And this is what I aim for. And this is the message that I am aiming for through an embrace of noise in my work. I don't know what this is, but I think I'm running late, so maybe I'll stop here and we can get to comments and questions. Thank you. I'll stop sharing so I can see you all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eryk. Does anyone have a question? Yes, I'm going to just let me.
I mean, it's just a unique one. Yeah. Thank you. Would it be possible to see that video? It would be nice to, get an example of actually, seeing it in motion.
Why don't I do this? We'll do the Q&A, and then when we would close, I'll put it on. And then if people have to leave, they can leave. But this way we get to questions. Is that all right with the Watershed folks? It's 5 minutes long.
That's good. All right.
Okay.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. So what are your thoughts about using, I don't want to use the term collaborator or adversary, because I haven't really formulated what the term is, but the way I like to use it is I like to use AI for trying to do the same processes that I would do, seeing what bits it's good at, and seeing what bits I'm good at, and using it almost like a resistance training for creativity, so that you niche yourself more and more towards what it's not good at. Just like if you are a freelancer and then you become an agency, you get more employees, you move to more of a place of leverage and vision. And then you tend to ask the question, what is it that I'm trying to envision here? And so you're bringing these sort of like higher order levels of creativity that wouldn't really exist as much in the past, because you'd always have to balance it with practical application. What are your thoughts on this relationship? So it's not advocacy, it's not collaboration. I don't know the term. What's your general thought on this approach?
So I think one of the things I'm usually careful to say is there's a difference between the defaults that we get out of these models, right? And there's a difference between the defaults and the things we do with those images. And so, Ted Chiang wrote recently in The Atlantic about the decisions as a kind of definition of creativity, and the number of decisions being a kind of metric for how creative we are. I find some problem with that, because one decision can be extraordinarily creative, and a number of decisions can be incredibly rote. So what I'm understanding from your relationship that you've described is that you're making decisions about how to prompt and prod the model, and then you're making decisions about what's coming back, and you're adapting to that. And I would say that what you're essentially I wouldn't define it. I wouldn't aim to define that model, but I would say that this seems like something in between, maybe. Like it's up to you. I wouldn't want to impose a definition on your own practice, you know? But I would see that you could tell me that that was adversarial or collaborative. I think that this is about a self-definition, and whatever anchors you to get the results that you want, right? But to me, maybe interrogation is the word that you're working with, which I think weighs toward the adversarial. But it kind of depends on the system, the level of the system you're interested in engaging. So I think about the adversarial thing is because I'm aware of a broader, not broader than you, but I mean broader than the system, a broader social context of AI, which is this imaginary, this techno-social imaginary of it, and trying to find ways to inoculate myself to that and inoculate others to that type of imaginary. So to me, that is adversarial, not just with the system, but also to the kind of techno-social myths that are presented around the system. So yeah, I'm kind of just rambling now, but in short, I wouldn't want to define that for you. But I think there's something about the scale that you're engaging with that could help you define the practice for yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was going to ask what you meant by inoculation, but I'm sure there's other people who have other questions, so I'll just pass you on. Thank you.
Yeah, basically a kind of protection mechanism, right? A literacy that helps us see through metaphors that simplify and help us sort of not reduce ourselves to fit the metaphors of human intelligence that have been embedded into these myths about what AI is, right? Not to say like, yes, the machine's creative because it does step 1, step 2, step 3. Therefore, I am creative if I do step 1, step 2, step 3. And therefore, creativity means people who follow step 1, step 2, step 3, right? Like that's obviously like a very simple reduction, but there's all kinds of metaphors embedded into this AI system as human thinking, as human learning, as human seeing, that fundamentally are different from the ways that quote unquote humans see. And part of the reason for that is because there is no human, right? Humans see or don't see, right? Different things depending on what they're coming from, their embodiments. There's all kinds of things that complicate this idea of quote unquote human-like intelligence. So I'm trying to get at that in a lot of the work I do. So that's what I mean by stripping imagination out of AI, if that makes sense. And sorry, I know there's another question.
So you say you want to strip imagination out of AI, but I was just thinking about the images generated from when you asked it to generate an image of noise, and you said there's no input data that looks anything like those images that are represented. So I was wondering if you thought that maybe this does show that AI does use a little bit of imagination in the way it generates its outputs, and if not, and if it's more like definite to the data, then where is it drawing this information from?
So it's not drawing from information, it's drawing from a process. It is an artifact of a process. It's in a way, it's a bit like replacing your printer ink or corrupting a PDF, right? Or corrupting a JPEG. What we're doing is we're getting into the process and we're kind of glitching out the process, because what the process is designed to do is remove noise. But when it strips noise out of an image and then sends it to the second part of that process, which is to confirm whether or not this is an image of noise, it then goes back and strips more information out of that in order to generate patterns and clusters of pixels that are supposed to be closer to the image we prompt in. So if it's a flower, it's generating patterns in the shape of flowers based on the training data. If it's a man, it's generating clusters of pixels in the shape of quote unquote a man. And then this image recognition thing is saying, yes, that looks like a man, but now let's refine it. Let's pass it to the next step. So really what is happening is we're going through this process, which is mechanized, right? It is a mechanical process and it is a predetermined process. The AI system cannot even say, I can't do that, right? There's no sort of way of thinking around that. But what it does instead is continues to follow these patterns, even though there's consistent failures. And so what we're doing is talking about a glitch in a machine, which is very different from, I think, an imagination of the machine, because an imagination suggests you can get away from a mechanized step-by-step process, right? You don't have to color in the dots number by number, or connect the dots number by number. Creativity, I think, is being able to see new arrangements of dots, and break away from the prescription that you're given, break away from this predetermined process that you're meant to follow. That's what happens with creativity. Unless the creative decision is, I'm going to commit myself to a step-by-step process, right? So, but that's still a decision. That's a creative decision that an artist is imposing on themselves. Whereas this machine cannot make that decision for itself. It cannot imagine an alternate possibility to the step-by-step process that it was designed to follow. And so what we're seeing is it doing that process regardless of the fact that it is failing. And so that's, I think, what I'm looking at as what this artifact sort of represents. It represents this, of course, in my imagination and hopefully all of yours, but there is no imagination in the system.
So do you think, given enough time, that these noisy images that look quite cool and stuff will just end up being like regular noise, static, if you give it enough time to train itself?
I don't know that time would do that. I think it's you could imagine a different structure in the system. The interesting sort of failure point here is the image recognition system, which is designed to give the model feedback on whether or not this arrangement of pixels is close enough to the words in the prompt. And if people started designing a system that could somehow strip out that check and balance relationship between the model and what passes through the model, then the noise might get closer to actual static. But at the moment, it's not a matter of scaling the data. It's the structure of processing that data that's introducing these glitches and artifacts.
Hi, I found your explanation of how it all works really enlightening, so thank you for that to start with. It struck me that with the training images, I'm assuming they're labeled manually. Could be wrong, but...
Depends on your definition of manually.
Okay, I was wondering about noise introduced at this point. So say, assuming they were, then you could, it's prone to misspellings or just obtuse labelings or just outright error. Is that an area of noise you've explored?
Yes. So there's a lot of interesting things around this idea. So just to be clear, the labels for these images come from captions, human assigned captions. So if I put up an image and I say, these are flowers for my wife on Valentine's Day, right? That image gets strongly associated with like flower and Valentine's Day, right? The context gets stripped away and these sort of keywords cluster around the images we upload. That's why these images of stereo view are linked specifically to the images in that archive. So one of the things that's really interesting to explore, and we've seen a lot of people doing this, is what if you use like machine labeling? So when you take a picture with your camera and you share it and you don't actually care about the picture, you'll oftentimes not even bother to give it a title or a caption, right? So it comes up and it's like img_5932.jpg. And so what happens if you go into these models and you prompt that, right? What happens if you prompt like auto-generated metadata? And what people have found is it generates this weird kind of like snapshot photography of like families at kitchen tables, and like there's a weird relationship in the sense of what it is generating. So that's one way I think of investigating some of this. The other thing is to use misspellings or to use reshuffling of the letters themselves. So rather than asking for pool, we could ask for a LOPO, L-O-P-O, right? Because it's actually the same tokens, because it breaks these things, these words down, not as linguistic concepts the way we do, but as two-letter pairs that represent information, right? So PO, when it is paired with OL, is a coordinate in the training data or in the model, right? I'm simplifying. People are going to yell at me, but like I'm simplifying for the sake of time. But so that information is accessed through PO and OL when it's paired together. That's an address. So LOPO is actually like kind of accessing like a weird part of that address. Misspellings are a fascinating area to explore. However, a lot of these models, being more sophisticated, are auto-correcting without you knowing the misspellings. And oftentimes they're changing your prompt. If you use models that are commercial models where you're working with somebody else's interface, rather than working on models that are on your own desktop, there's a lot of barriers between the thing you are requesting in your prompt and the thing the model actually sees. So more and more, this is becoming harder to interrogate.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the room?
Thank you. That's very interesting. Is this where you're like trying to find the gaps between the training data? And as we're actually interfacing with these models through language, how have you found using different kinds of words to describe noise? So what if you were to ask for a meaningless image or a random image? Does that affect what you get back?
So those are definitely things I've played around with, and they're very often referencing things in the training material. But there are other things that used to be more, I'll say generative, right? In my sense of the word, such as looking at the resolution that these models were capable of producing. So back in the early days of Stable Diffusion, if you were using the commercial model, you were limited to a certain kind of density of pixels, right? The resolution was kind of fixed and was kind of low. And if you asked for images that could only be produced with high density images, you would lose a lot of information, right? Like it would start getting glitchy. So one of the things I found really interesting was half note, what is it called? I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the phrase, but the type of printing pattern that's like super dot, like matrixy, color halftone printing. So color halftone printing is really detailed. And in order to see the pattern of a color halftone print, right, which is literally just colors, dotted colors that, because they're close to each other, create the illusion of other colors, which is an early printing process, I mean like 1960s, 1970s printing process. The resolution needed to depict that level of detail was not possible in the models. And so you got these weird and interesting distortions as a result. So that's one thing, which is like kind of like glitching the system indirectly. And then the other thing that's interesting is in this pattern of noise, you can pair it with things. And so I have a whole series around human hands and noise, because the human hand is recognizable by that image recognition system. And it prioritizes, it looks for that image of the human hand, or the shape or the pattern of a human hand in an image before it allows it to be acceptable and passed on. So it's generating noise, but it's also generating the structure of a human hand. And so you got very noisy human hands. And so I have a large series of works that are just that. Whereas other things that are more complicated disappear. So like if you ask for human bodies and noise, it actually just gives you noise for quite often, right? If you ask for complicated scenes, it will just give you noise, because that's what the image recognition system in this model is recognizing and prioritizing. It's saying 100% chance that that's noise, and that's good enough. Maybe we don't care about the other stuff in the prompts because you've got the noise thing. Let's pass that on. Obviously, that's not the conversation that's taking place, but you know, the transcription for human terms of what's going on.
All right. Thank you very much, Eryk. I think that's probably all we got time for. I know we said we'd show the video, but maybe it would be better if we can share that online, because I think it's quite long, isn't it?
It's 5 minutes. Is that?
Maybe we finish up here and then we can play it out? Okay. All right, so before
enough.
you all go, before we watch Eryk's video, please don't forget today is First Friday, so from 5 to 7 p.m. today, we got our monthly social event. Come along, grab a drink, see some of the work our community is making. If you want to stick around in Hot Desk today or find out more about what we do, please come find one of the studio team and we'll be happy to help. Studio team, give us a wave. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Always and forever. If you're watching online, drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next time. But first, we're going to watch Eryk's video.
Thanks, everybody. Here we go, and then I will disappear afterward. But here we go. This is a section of a longer film called Human Movie. Hope you enjoy it.
Birds and bird cages. What resides safely at the center? And what dissolves as the place we rest hardens into something solid? Other options. Other ways of being the periphery fluttering on beyond our view. It's easy to rest our eyes on the settled concepts. The things we know, the predictions we trust, the definitions that comfort us. But outside, there's something other, something free, that's dissolving. From within the center, we observe the periphery anxiously, something beyond the confines, a reminder of the chaos of dispersing energy, a reminder of the entropy that bursts forth, but slowly dissolves, a fear of the thing beyond our reckoning. The world outside is always dissolving. We retreat to the safety of the center. Noise is entropy. The universe peeling apart. If we hold too tightly to the center, it tears at us. We want to stay in one place, but the atoms are always moving. And if they stopped, we'd turn cold. And so, the only choice we have is to let go and allow ourselves to find a place to drift in the in-between.
Cheers. Thanks.